Hi, I'm Stuart Bowes. Welcome to this 100 Days of Labour Big Zero Show online special. Today's podcast is with Tim Rotheray from Viridor. We're talking about heat decarbonisation and whether Labour have ducked the heat challenge. Tim, thanks for joining us. Now, we'll talk a little bit about what you're doing with Viridor when it comes to heat as well. But you've been in the sector for a long time. You've been part of the ADE, you've headed it up, you've looked at heating policy. Just overall, since Labour took power in July, have you been surprised? Have you been kind of pleased? Have you been like, actually, they've put in so many policies. Before we talk about heat, they've really gone for this kind of setting themselves up as the government to get us to net zero. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that what we've seen over the initial period of the government in terms of their ambition around net zero, which is particularly focused in the net zero power sector, is genuinely exciting. We know that when government takes a leadership position, sets clear ambition, and then puts policy behind it, then you can use that to really deliver progress. So that's really exciting. The thing that is important now, is going to be the delivery of it. The challenge of trying to do stuff fast is that you might get it wrong.
Yep.
I think, and that's always a risk, right? Yeah, everyone wants everything to happen quickly, and then we all sit there and go, we'd like certainty, whilst all arguing that we want change, which is an irony of anyone that's involved in policy. But also, the other piece is that actually some of the more challenging parts of the sector, in the energy sector, particularly like heat, at the minute haven't got much of a look in.
And that's been the case for decades. I know you and I go back a long way, and you've always said that, you know, whether it's the word Cinderella, you can use Cinderella because she had lots of soot, and that's gone now in the zero carbon world. But, you know, the fact is, I think in this sort of 10, 14 years we've been doing it, heat has been left alone because it's been a lot easier to go, let's go electricity, let's look at transport, let's look at things that actually people understand. Oh, look, I've got a car that's got no tailpipe, it's an EV. Whereas if it's only go, oh, by the way, come and look at my boiler, you're not that bothered.
Yeah.
Is it that the thing is, it's so difficult because of infrastructure, and also it hasn't had that pull politically to say that should be the number one thing we're getting on with?
I think there's a couple of things. One is heat is either bad or boring, right? When your heating doesn't work, it's bad.
Correct.
And it becomes the most important thing in your life. And then when it's working, it's just like, okay, I got up and it works. And I've never seen anyone get excited about boiler. I mean, maybe a little bit in some of the ADE kind of, you know, like sector meetings, but basically people don't get that excited about heat generation tech. The other thing is that there's a lot of political risk. If you give you an opportunity to go, oh, you can have a commercial discussion from government with a business about investing, or you can try and have lots and lots of discussions where you're going into people's houses and dealing with something which ultimately they operate and is very personal to them, and if it goes wrong is going to lead to, you know, an article in whichever consumer kind of magazine. That's got a lot of risk. So politically it's more appealing and arguably quicker to do things on kind of big power generation, and also the other thing is you get big ribbon cutting things. I mean, like if you're a minister, kind of cool to be on a ship in the middle of a massive wind farm and kind of go, I declare this wind farm open. I've not ever seen a minister go into a house and go, I declare this heat pump commissioned. I mean, it's just not that exciting. And you get the same with energy efficiency. So there are a lot of political...
But they're both so important, Tim, aren't they? I mean, this is the thing that goes on. How much heat goes out? We're always looking at generation. And Labour, since they've come in, they've just a few things. They've gone back to 2030 for phasing out gas boilers, right? New ones. And they want to really incentivize heat pumps, although I haven't seen anything, I don't know if you have, to really show that. We've spoken to people in the heat sector. Energy efficiency, they're talking about upgrading efficiency. Well, what does that mean? Where is it going? So, and they're looking at electrification. You know, the big thing is Great British Energy, let's make the grid greener, and that's the way we're going to get around it. Do you think that actually the stuff you just talked about there, the fact it is so personal, I like it, 19 degrees, my wife likes it, 21 degrees in the house, you know, all of those things, that sort of stuff It's difficult. It's buildings are tricky. Housing stock is old. There just seem to me, and again, you're the expert. There seem to be just going right. What we'll do is we'll treat heat by getting rid of the carbon in the grid.
That is where they're certainly starting. And anyone that understands the grid and heat demand realizes that you'll quite quickly run into some problems if you really start to ramp up, particularly as we're also looking at the move to EVs. So the move to EVs is a really, really exciting move. It makes a lot of sense. But actually, if we're starting to put those kind of loads onto homes, particularly heat pumps, then actually we've got to really think carefully about where and how it's going to work. And you also have to think about kind of the resilience of the house to be able to operate in a world where maybe you don't want it to be pulling off the grid 24/7 because of peak time power and grid constraints and so forth. So I think that's probably where they are. One of the pieces of work that I kind of regret that I never got to doing in the ADE that I would have liked to have done more on is thinking about how you do domestic energy efficiency. I think that there's a real opportunity there. I feel like a lot of the thinking in that space has been rather piecemeal. The thing that really struck me when I started to look at it was that houses are sold on average every 8 years. So that feels to me like for the owned house, and the private rented sector is different.
Of course,
they probably move more quickly, right? But for the owned housing stock, that happens every 8 years. We've also got a bunch of people who are interested in green mortgages. You kind of think, hang on, the consumer, is never going to be in a position to have the kind of capital to deploy the kind of efficiency that we need. You know, if I had a spare 40 grand sat in a bank, I'm unlikely to make my home super energy efficient.
Of course.
It's just not where I'm going to spend the money.
No.
And also the disruption associated is really big. But actually, given that it'll generate savings, effectively it's kind of where the Green Deal was trying to go, but never properly got to.
Yeah.
Actually, the time at which you sell the house and the opportunity where that house is empty, and that's also the time that most people will be getting a mortgage, and the fact that you've got EPCs, which sort of tell you the efficiency, there is the information there and the potential to actually link up the producers of the equipment, be that heat pump, other energy efficiency, solid wall, whatever, the consumer and the lender in a way that protects people. Because one of the things I find deeply frustrating is that we expect consumers to do the right thing, and it's so complex. We expect them to do the right thing in my sector of recycling. You expect them to do the right thing. You expect them to know what they should do in energy or on cars, and it's just like everyone's busy.
I'm too right.
We should facilitate a lot of that. I think some of the stuff you've seen, some of the companies like Octopus and others doing, which are really quite interesting about how they actually make life easier and the customer journey easier. We're not very good at thinking about that kind of thing.
What do you think about the creation of Great British Energy?
Really interesting, potentially more exciting than some of the other initiatives we've seen. So like the Green Investment Bank, I guess, in that one of the things that it looks like they could have the scope to do is actual development. So you then get into a world where government is kind of looking at taking its own risk in a way that with the GIB, they've tended to basically be similar to what the commercial markets offer, but just with a narrower focus. And they're not sure that they really necessarily move the dial that much. This could really move the dial. But a couple of thoughts. One is heat at the moment isn't in there.
No.
And everyone that you talk to who really thinks about how you decarbonize energy talks about it being an energy system. You demand and supply energy use. Ultimately, energy, we're really not interested in the energy. We're interested in the service, whether it's mobility or warmth or whatever. So I think that that's a really interesting proposition. This was after there was the first work on the capacity market where they looked at using electrical efficiency to as a way of generating security of supply. So can you reduce electricity demand? And they did a trial, and the trial worked really well. And the trial came out as being 10 times more expensive than the normal capacity market.
There you go.
And the reason, do you know why? They calculated it on the single year cost. The thing is that the energy efficiency works this year and next year and the year after and the year, and they just said, well, it just cost this amount of money. But they forgot to include the fact that it delivers energy efficiency for 10 or 15 years. So it looked like it was 10 times more expensive, actually almost certainly cheaper.
Do you think, like we say, we're coming to 100 days. It's only the first bit of this government. They've got 5 years to pull this together in terms, but the target's coming. I fear, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think heat's going to go down the same way it's been always, which is they're going to look at building big stuff. Like you said, it looks great. They're going to look at kind of, let's bring the private sector in with GB Energy. I'll give you some backing. You build me a solar farm. You build me this. And we'll leave the heat thing because, frankly, at the end of the day, if we do all the other stuff, that's what people will be looking at. Cleaner cars, less pollution, big wind turbines. The green is, the grid is green, kind of does us.
There is a risk of that. And to some extent, it's down to the sector to sell a really positive vision of what we can do. One of the things that you often notice when people talk about things like energy efficiency or heat, and I'm sure I'm guilty of this as well, is being a bit negative. Being like, oh, it's all quite difficult. Actually, you know what? How awesome is it if you are able to give people a home where it's just warm? Like, that's such a really valuable thing. And we have a load of homes which are genuinely leaky and they are not nice places to live, and children get asthma and all of these kind of things because we don't have. So there is a really exciting possibility that we as a sector need to sell. The other thing is that there's a real investment opportunity. One of the things that is clear when you look at the energy sector and you look at heat in particular, is you're going to build heat networks. If you're going to do major rollout of heat pumps, any of these things, it requires a material workforce in the UK. You really can generate the opportunity in the UK. And it seems to me that the government is very much looking to tie green growth, infrastructure, jobs, all into one thing and underpin it with this energy vision. Well, heat is your opportunity. There's real opportunity there, probably more than there is in power. You can import a lot of power materials and infrastructure. You can get it installed here. But actually, tell you what, if you're going to build a heat network,
you've got to be over here.
The majority of the work's going to happen in the UK.
You are at Viridor now, and one of the areas that I haven't seen anything about, but it is an area I've looked at and seen there is a growth, is this recovery, the energy from waste. Very briefly, what are you guys looking at, and how do you think that could help with things like those kind of local heat networks or even industrial heat networks that people are talking about?
Yeah, so for us, energy from waste, we looked quite a lot about how we as a business decarbonize, right? So energy from waste, you burn waste, it reduces emissions compared to landfill by about 40%, but it's still quite an emitting activity, right? You burn 1 ton of waste emits about half a ton of fossil CO2, and the UK produces about 25 million tons a year of waste, and we burn about 50 million tons a year in energy from waste facilities. Having looked at how you decarbonize, there are basically 2 things that you can do. One is get the plastic out. Plastic is the source of fossil carbon, basically, in energy from waste. So policies to increase recycling of plastics in particular and textiles are critical. And the second thing that you can then do, because you'll never get them all out, is carbon capture. And I'll be honest, I used to be a bit of a skeptic about carbon capture. I used to think it was kind of a big engineering solution to a problem. In the waste sector, it's actually the only way that you can get it to net zero. The really exciting thing that we've discovered is that because when we burn waste, we emit about half a ton of fossil carbon, but we also emit about half a ton of biogenic carbon, natural carbon, part of the carbon cycle. You can go carbon negative. So you can actually create carbon dioxide removals. And so for us, the opportunity to build, we're looking at doing it at our Runcorn facility. We're in the government competition. We're talking over £500 million investment to capture 900,000 tons of CO2 a year. That will pretty much decarbonize the waste of Manchester, but we also supply industrial heat and power. So we'll also generate zero carbon heat and power, and we'll be generating negative emissions, about 450,000 tons a year of negative emissions. The opportunity, there's about 60 EFWs in the UK, to then use EFW with carbon capture and then use that heat to decarbonize industry and towns with negative emission heat and power is really, really interesting. It's only something that people are just starting to become aware of, but we're really actively looking at it now. And we're already £20 million invested in developing carbon capture at Runcorn.
I think that stuff is brilliant. And I think we need that industry working together with local authorities and planners and developers. Just before we go, obviously, I don't want to go too much into the politics of the pensioners, but it's a point that, you just talked about the warm homes, and that losing that kind of, the winter fuel payment has created a real problem here for a lot of people. And I think it just brings into an overwhelming piece that it's a very strange thing about decarbonising heat, because, you go through the basic things of, we had coal, then we had town gas, then we moved to gas. People are talking about hydrogen, people are talking about electrification. But at the end of the day, the housing stock in this country, doesn't matter what the hell you heat it from, the fabrics, unless it's very new, are pretty poor at keeping that heat in. Mm. That challenge is one that ties into Labour's home building promise that they've done and Angela Rayner stuff. Do you think there's going to have to be, if they really want to get to where they want to get, they're going to have to put the energy bods and the housing bods together to say that actually from now on you build clean heat homes?
I mean, 100%. We have to build clean heat homes. I think that the Climate Change Committee, during the energy crisis, when it was really peaking, the electricity price, they showed how much additional cost it was on the economy as a result of having abandoned zero carbon homes. Like, it is really, really clear when we build lower efficiency homes, what you do is you reduce the cost of construction to the constructor and you put that onto the bill payer. And that is really, really essential. But the big thing is the existing housing stock. That's where the big challenge is. You said get the energy bods and the plans together. Yeah, 100%. Get the financiers in as well, though.
Yeah.
Because the thing I'm convinced of, the idea of going, actually, if our homes sell on once every 8 years, that kind of, on the majority of the housing stock, that means you've got the opportunity to do a renovation every 8 years. What's that in terms of job creation? What's that in terms of capital deployment in the UK? What's that in terms of GVA? It could be really big. You could really do something interesting, and you could regenerate homes in a way that made them genuinely desirable.
Yes.
My mum's just sold her house, and she sold her house and moved out of her house from the 1900s. And she came to my house, which is well insulated. And she said to me, I really want to live in a house where it's just warm everywhere.
Yeah, I get it. Absolutely.
People love it.
They do.
So that for me would be, I love that with me as a policy area to sort out is really exciting, but you need to think about it differently. You can't think about it going, I want consumers to take out loads of typical kind of credit
loans. Absolutely. Yeah.
We've got to think about it in terms of the house and the value and the mortgage market. There's a lot of opportunity there, and it's just untapped, I think.
Well, I would agree with you. It's been a pleasure as ever, Tim Rotheray. Thanks very much for joining us for this 100 Days podcast. Really, really good information. Thanks a lot for your time.
Thanks very much, Sam. Really enjoyable to speak to you.
Thanks for watching that. Great stuff from Tim Rotheray. Tomorrow on 100 Days, we have got transport and electrification all kicking off at 11 a.m. with a webinar with Quentin Wilson and Edmund King from the AA, talking about whether EVs and the charging infrastructure are really our pathway to net zero. Check out everything on futurenetzero.com, register for the webinar, and I'll see you tomorrow.